Good evening. Tonight, we're not debating tax policy or infrastructure projects. We're debating a statue, a piece of bronze and stone. But what it represents has ignited a firestorm that speaks to something far deeper than metal or marble. The statue of Caesar Rodney once stood in the center of Rodney Square until it didn't, removed during a moment of national reckoning. It now sits in storage, out of sight, but apparently not out of mind. The Caesar Rodney Foundation says it should return. They argue history deserves to be remembered, not erased. With us tonight are Mr. Charlie Copeland and Mr. Brice, who believe that Rodney's midnight ride to cast a decisive vote for American independence outweighs the darker parts of his legacy. But Wilmington City Council President Mr. Ernest Trippi Congo says, not so fast. He's not just pushing back, he's pushing for a broader understanding of public honor, of what, and more importantly, who we choose to celebrate in the most visible spaces of our city. This is a conversation about history, yes, but it's also about identity, power, and truth. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then good. It means we're doing something right, because democracy isn't a spectator sport. It's messy, it's loud, and sometimes it requires us to rethink the people we once placed on pedestals. This is the agenda, and tonight, we're not looking away. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of The Agenda. As always, we're bringing information to you to ensure that your issues and your problems and the things that you want to know in your community are brought to the forefront. That's right, The Agenda. Tonight, there's no difference. I have my nemesis, as always. Mr. Charlie Copeland's here joining me, and he brought his artillery, his backup, because he knew this was going to be a very heated discussion. Mr. Brice, who is Secretary of the Delaware GOP, thank you so much, and a first-time guest right here on The Agenda. No, you actually came a long time ago, like maybe our fourth guest. It was great, and we have, as always, another return guest here, Mr. Trippi Congo, and he is President of Wilmington City Council. Thank you so much, Councilman Congo, for having the time to come here on the show and talk about this. As this is a special edition of The Agenda, we're going to go for about an hour. We're going to have this discussion. Charlie and I started this discussion maybe a month or so ago. We didn't have as much time as we wanted to, but we knew that it was important for Delawareans, for Wilmingtonians to have this discussion. And let's be honest, Charlie, as our viewers know, we're very candid in what we say to one another out of respect and love, but candid nonetheless, gentlemen. And let me be the first to say, this was not an easy task.
You think?
This was not an easy task. This was finding a house in the rain and the dark in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it was difficult because this is a topic that not many people want to talk about.
Everybody wants to turn their head away. Everybody, as opposed to where is the common ground on these issues?
We're going to find something tonight, I guarantee you. We're going to find it tonight. And we hope that you at home are listening. We're expecting, we don't want you to, we're expecting you to comment. I guarantee you that if your comment is thorough and well thought out and respectful, I know some people here that will probably reply to it, right? So make sure that you reach out to us on our platforms of Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, and really think about what we're going to talk about here tonight. But Charlie, I have to ask the question first, and Brandon, this is to you too. And I'm pretty sure the Councilman Congo wants to know. And I'm going to be frank, why in the hell do you want to bring this statue back at this time in our country where there's so many things going? And I mean, you all Republicans, you probably think it's the best time in America, but for the consensus, bringing it back to what it is, or what's the slogan? Making it great again, or something they drew on a hat. But look, I don't know why you would choose this mountain, this hill, to rest upon. I don't want to say die because I like you too much.
I guess the simplest answer is when are you going to do it, right? I mean, If you'd asked me 4 weeks ago, gee, do we think what's going on in the country right now, this would be the right time to talk about it? I probably would have said, maybe not, right? But frankly, what's happening in Washington, D.C. really has very little impact on anybody's daily life in Delaware. There are some funds that have been cut to the university, and there are going to be other things. And so we're going to see that. But as of right now, most social services are being delivered. The state seems to be running fine. I mean, the big issues down in Dover right now are the court and the port. Seems like a rhyming thing
so
going on.
So the 2,000 federal employees that reside here in the state of Delaware that lost their jobs due to DOGE budget cuts, which we're not going to get into. You're not going to take me down this road. That are not, everything's fine.
So if you want to look at job cuts in the state of Delaware over the last 20 years, we've gone through wave after wave of private sector cuts. That's part of the reason why the economy in the state of Delaware is in such a terrible spot. So my point is that what's happening in Washington has happened in the private sector. Look at all the DuPont jobs that are gone, the bank jobs that are gone, the auto plant jobs that are gone. So yeah, the economy moves along and it's terrible, right? I mean, in my business, and I'm sure in your family's business, there have been times where you had to let people go. And it hurts, and it hurts everybody. But if the revenues aren't there, you got to do what you got to do. So that aside, like I just said, if 4 weeks ago you'd asked me and said, oh, by the way, these other things are going to happen, I probably would have said, yeah, maybe we should hold off and let the dust settle. But you make the best decisions that you can make at the time that you're making them. So here we are.
So sell me. So Trippi and myself, I think Brandon's already sold. Why are we putting this statue back up here?
So in 1765, across the entire globe, one thing was true. Slavery was everywhere. Everywhere. There wasn't a country, there wasn't a city, there wasn't a state, if you want to call things states, that did not, in some way, shape, or form, have slavery. It was legal. In some places, those slaves were of African descent. In other places, those slaves were of European descent. In some of those places, they were Asians or Indians. Slavery existed everywhere. And it was bad everywhere. Note that the term slave comes from the word Slav, as in Slavic people. And for hundreds of years, Western Europeans, the Mongol hordes, the Ottomans and the Turks and the Arabs would race up into the Slavic areas of Europe and grab people and take them into slavery. As a matter of fact, the Ottoman ruler Suleiman the Magnificent, his favorite concubine was a raven-haired Slavic woman who sired him 3 children. She came from the area that now would be called Ukraine. So prior to 1765, there was no serious, thoughtful societal effort or governmental effort anywhere in the world in which people were talking about getting rid of slavery. And then, in a very small pocket, in an area that nobody had ever heard of before, northern Delaware, central Delaware, parts of Pennsylvania, because William Penn was a Quaker, but the Quakers started to think about the rights of man writ large. And in this area of the country, something dramatic happened. And people started to talk about, is slavery the thing we ought to have in this world? If people have rights brought to them by God, by the fact that they exist as humans, shouldn't they have the right to themselves? And that debate started in the Philadelphia region of the world. There were some other philosophers along the way who'd made some thoughts. There were the French philosophers Voltaire and Montesquieu. There were some Islamic scholars a few centuries before that talked about within Islam should Muslims not enslave other Muslims. But there was no thought about, irrespective of what your beliefs were as an individual, what your beliefs were as an individual, or what your beliefs, that you should be free. Nowhere in the world. And it started here. It started in this area. And Caesar Rodney was not a Quaker, but he knew the Quakers. And in those conversations, in that life, in that milieu of new thinking that had not ever been thought of in the globe before, people like Caesar Rodney started to say, the there's something wrong going on here. I don't know how to fix it because it's entrenched everywhere. Matter of fact, other than maybe Massachusetts and Rhode Island, you couldn't even legally free a slave in these colonies or anywhere else in the world, because everywhere else in the world where you had kings or pharaohs or whatever, the king owned everything. And so you had to get the king or the lord or whomever to make that decision. So there was nowhere in the world. And so we ought to recognize and celebrate the role that this area played and the role that Caesar Rodney indeed played in starting this ball moving that brought freedom, not just in the United States, through a series of hellish wars and hellish government programs and lynchings and Jim Crow, and brought us through 200 years of pain and suffering, but they started it. But the rest of the world ultimately has, at least in word, if not in deed, embraced the freedom of peoples. And that started here, and we should celebrate that.
So I believe that the case still stands, and I want to be clear, in no way will I let the fact that because it was practiced, it was good, an absolute good. It wasn't.
Agreed.
From a date perspective, the Quakers in 1688 made it very clear that this was wrong, that it needed to stop, and they tried to build an alliance. Whether that made it down to Kent County, to Mr. Caesar Rodney, I don't know. But it was a horrible time. It was a time where people didn't have a choice. Several folks were raped. Several folks were tortured. And that happened within these 3 counties and facilitated by landowners, in which Caesar Rodney was. Again.
Can I hold you there?
Please.
In the city of Wilmington today, we have shootings and murders and drug deals and rapists. I don't fault other residents of the city because of the bad actions of a few.
But you would fault that rapist.
You're damn right I would.
You would
And
fault
so-
the person who shot.
And that's right. And so in the case that you're describing, though, you said there were your rapes and murders and beatings and lynchings going on, none of which Caesar Rodney did.
Is that a fact that we don't know that? That's never
It is true. We do not know that, but what we do know is that that there is no recorded in history of him doing any of those things, nor of any of those things around Blythefield Plantation having been done. But you are correct that could that have happened? Sure, I would certainly say that it could have been done by his dad. I have no idea.
Right, and I think that to compare American slavery to the rest of the world's slavery isn't a fair comparison, because American slavery was 100% different from the rest of the world's slavery. The rest of the world's slavery, most of the slaves, they became slaves usually through casualties of war. But where American slavery, you weren't even treated as human. You were considered less than human. You were born into slavery. Other countries, other nations didn't. Once somebody was a slave, they could work their way out of being a slave. Their children weren't automatically born into slavery like it was here in America. So there's definitely not a comparison. Those families in other nations weren't broken up. The women weren't raped. Like, the men weren't allowed to be with their families. But hold on one second, please. So American slavery was totally different. It was torture, and it wasn't the same as other countries' it's their type of slavery. So it's not fair to say that everyone was doing it, because nobody practiced slavery like America did.
So you said that we don't have any proof that Caesar Rodney didn't torture or rape.
Right.
And you've made a statement that the slavery across the globe didn't rape or force children into slavery, or didn't just grab slaves. Do you have proof that that was the case?
No, I said that they weren't automatically born. If you can do a Google search, and you can say American slavery compared to other forms of slavery, and it'll tell you that American slavery was the absolute worst by far, because you weren't treated as a human, you were considered less than human, the families were split up, their children were automatically born into slavery. Caesar Rodney had children working as slaves. Slaves began to work around 7 to 10 years old. So this man had 7 to 10-year-olds.
Once again, let me ask you for the
Yes.
evidence that that is the case.
So he had 200 slaves.
Let me ask you evidence of that.
Right.
Let me just ask you the evidence to show that he had 200 slaves.
You have to let me, that he had 200 slaves?
Yeah, exactly.
It's known.
But how?
If you look it up, if you do the research.
I have.
And how many did you research?
So this, I think, is an important
Right.
point. This is a very important point.
Right.
There is no documented history, no documented contemporary with Caesar Rodney's life that there were 200 slaves. What there is a book from the mid to late 1800s on the history of Delaware in which they state that he had 200 slaves. As far as I know, there's no reference to it, and there's no reference document that you can go look up. What we do know,
That he had them.
what we do know,
How many slaves is enough?
well, so we do know that when he died, he manumitted, he freed 18 slaves.
Right.
We
know
also
why?
know. We also could. We also know that his plantation was about 860 acres and was growing wheat and barley. We also know that a contemporary of his, John Dickinson, was also alive at the time, and John Dickinson didn't die until 1808. So we have much more history on John Dickinson. John Dickinson's farm was 5,000 acres, and he had 59 slaves for 5,000 acres. He grew wheat, he grew barley, he grew corn, and so did the Rodneys. They grew wheat and barley and corn. If you look at the acreage, 18 slaves is what would be the number to run that property. We have no, and so what we have is we have physical evidence in his will that he freed all of his slaves, 18. We have no record of how many slaves he had before that, but we do know the size of his plantation, and we know the size of a plantation just up the road for him that was doing the exact same things that his was, with only 59 slaves. I'm not saying that any slaves is the right number, but at the time,
Sounds like,
That's what it sounds like.
Go ahead. If I may jump in, because
I'm saying it's not 200, it's 20.
Give me 1 sec. So listen, whether it's 20 or 200, the conversation tonight is about should the statue be put back up or why was it taken down? And I think one of the interesting things to look at this is when you look at the life of Caesar Rodney, we're not saying this man was perfect by any means, but what we are saying is him serving in the General Assembly and him having the courage in the 1700s when this was taboo. They didn't talk about letting slaves or ending the slave trade. This is a man who is documented as saying the state of Delaware needs to end the slavery movement. Needs to end the benefits, the beneficiaries of slavery in this state. That's documented. And the challenge with that is, I think this is an opportunity because that one push, even though it didn't pass in the assembly, that one gesture was the catalyst for the abolitionist movement in America, which started right here in the greater Philadelphia area. So I think what we're talking about is, and I think this is why it's so important for the state of Delaware, the city of Wilmington residents, to have the understanding of when we're talking about taking a statue down. There's millions of statues that are up that have been controversial. But is the information presented to the general public to say who was truly Caesar Rodney outside of someone who helped with the founding of the nation? This is a man who stood up against the 1,000 in saying slavery in this state is wrong. And to me,
And he said that while he had slaves.
But he said it. And the fact that this man was brave enough to say it, when again, and I go back to, that was taboo to speak of that. And the fact that he said it was the catalyst to start this movement of, whether it's the Quakers or the abolitionists, that slavery in America is wrong and it must be stopped. And for that, I think that's a conversation to have as to should or should not that statue as a symbol of hope from a person who literally was not well. You know, if you do the history of Caesar Rodney, he was not a man in good shape. He was short. He had a lot of health issues. But this is a man who challenged the status quo by simply bringing the question in the legislature to say on record
that slavery was wrong.
Well,
just
why do
real
you
quick,
want to
Carol,
put,
if I
hold on for just one second, sir. Why, with that being said, I think we can agree on something here, is that he did own slaves, okay? We won't quantify it. But why, if you have a city that's predominantly African American, who feels offended by its presence, why in the world would you put up this reference back in the city of Wilmington?
Because, Kerwin, that reference, you can look at it from two different angles. You can look at it on the one end and say, this is a man who had slaves. George Washington had slaves. I mean, that was unfortunately a part of history. And here's the thing about history. We don't get to pick the good, the bad, the ugly of history. History
Yes, we
is-
do.
No,
We
no,
did.
no, no,
We
no,
did.
no,
We
no,
took
no,
it down.
No,
Yes,
but
we
that's
did.
the problem, because history, you don't get to pick the good, the bad side of history. History is history. But what it should symbolize is an opportunity for people to say, this is a man, for whatever reason, for whatever the purpose was, in our legislature down in Dover, on record said that slavery, the enslavement and bringing slaves to this state, the enslavement process in America needs to end. He said, now it didn't pass, but the fact that it's on record as this is a man who took the courage and took the risk, because that was not a popular stance in the 1700s. But he took the risk to say it is wrong and it needs to stop. That right there deserves a conversation.
So I want to reply to a couple of things that you gentlemen said.
Please.
He did admit that he had at least 18 to 20 slaves and he freed them, but he freed them gradually. And do we know why he freed them gradually? He wanted them to age out of slavery. So he had little children who he kept as slaves until they were old enough to age out of slavery, which was, and again, slavery started around 7 to 10 years old. So he had these little children who he kept as slaves, and he went and he said what he said in front of the government. But that's like me saying, you know what, you shouldn't abuse your children, but I'm still abusing mine. Like he said it, but he had the opportunity to say, okay, slaves, you're free. And matter of fact, I have 850 acres, take an acre. Take 2 acres. Let me finish. Let me finish. So for him to say it, but not show it, that speaks volumes to me, because he could have said they denied. The state is saying no, but I can free you, and I can give you some property, and I can make sure that your family is going to be sustained. You can sustain yourselves. But he didn't do that. He said, when I die, let them free, and gradually. And he had little children as slaves.
I agree with your point. Your point is as well
And I
taken.
guess,
Absolutely.
and Kerwin's point, I don't know if anyone has answered it. Like, why would you want to have that kind of emotional trauma to a city that is majority black?
And he could have freed them.
Right.
And so let's just say, for the sake of argument, and just roll with me on this one,
Okay.
that he wanted to do just what you said. He wanted to free them, right? And he wanted to free them sooner rather than later. Just let me just make that up and pretend like Charlie's right.
Okay.
So it's 1784. The revolution just ended in 1781. We were not yet a nation. We were just individual colony states. Now we were individual countries, and we had just come through this war, and there were still people going around. And by the way, in almost every colony at that time, manumitting or freeing slaves was either illegal or highly regulated, that it required something by the governor or whatever. So let's just say he goes to the governor of Delaware and he says, look, I want to free all my slaves right now. And the governor of Delaware or whomever is going to say, okay, fine. What are they going to do? So you say, okay, why don't you peel off an acre or two? And so here's a group of 20 people who the other neighbors don't want to deal with them because they're worried about their slaves. And by the way, John Dickinson freed his slaves in 2 years after Caesar Rodney died, and freed his slaves in 1786. So I mean, there was some effort to do that after Caesar Rodney had begun that process. But before that, we were in a war, or it was just illegal. So these people would have been cast to try to live on their wiles without, he hadn't lived in Massachusetts, or hadn't lived in New York, or parts of Pennsylvania, or whatever. You don't know. So I hear what you're saying, and he perhaps could have done that, but perhaps he looked at it and said, I don't know what to do, because the rest of society is still here, I'm over here, and I don't know how to bridge that gap. And a matter of fact, as a country, it took us the Civil War to actually bridge that gap. And then we went to Jim Crow. So, I mean, this is a difficult issue for all of us. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it. I'm saying, put into the context of his life, it's something we ought to talk about, and it's something we ought to point out that all of us have an opportunity in our lives to do what's right, irrespective of the consequences. And sometimes people say, well, the consequences, I think, are worse than what I maybe should do right now.
So let me ask you this one question. Yeah. I'm sorry to cut you off, sir. I think it's fair to say, trying to be as fair as I can at this table, that no one here, besides Mr. Congo, has a better feel of the citizens of Wilmington. Do we agree on that? Than probably the council president.
I mean, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily, I hear the angle that you're going at.
No, I just want to know, what is your consensus? Yeah. What have the citizens of this town about this discussion? Because this isn't the first time that they tried to have this discussion. Right. What has the citizens come back and told you?
I'm glad you asked that question. So this conversation probably first started around 4 years ago with former Mayor Pizicki. And he had a panel of some people who wanted to put the statue back up. And there was conversation just like there is now. And it was overwhelmingly opposed by the city of Wilmington, by the citizens of Wilmington. I don't know too many people who just kind of stood on their 10 toes and said, I want to put that statue back up, and did not have at least 300 to 500 other people on the opposite side saying, no, we don't want it back up. So the conversation immediately died down because he knew that the pushback was just too risky. And we just went through the riots, and it just wasn't worth it. So the conversation came back up probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And again, it was Mayor Pizicki saying, do we put this statue back up? What do we do with this statue? And again, overwhelmingly, everybody who I reached out to, white and black, it's just not worth it. It's not worth the emotional trauma to even engage in a conversation, let alone put the statue back up. So now, if it goes back, when I did a live on my Facebook page, just talking about it, wanted to get people's input, white and black, unanimously said, don't do it. It's not worth it. We understand. We don't feel your pain, but we understand your pain. That was from the non-black people who were a part of that conversation. And it would cause so much emotional trauma. At a minimum, I think that it would turn this city upside down if that statue were to go back up. And I want to thank, because this isn't really a conversation about is the statue going back up, because it's not. So I want to thank Mayor Carney and his administration for saying, look, the statue is not going back up. We understand. So the statue isn't going back up. But I understand why we can still have the conversation about the relevance of Caesar Rodney. But it would do far more harm than good overall, physically and emotionally to our city.
Kerwin, this is the problem. If we want to talk about why things don't get done, is
in government.
Is the challenge is we asked, well, who created the narrative with these folks, and was there an opportunity presented to the people of Wilmington where they could learn about who simply Caesar Rodney was? I'll be very honest. Until I did the research, obviously there was the narrative that obviously he was one of the 4 founding fathers, but he was a slave owner, done deal. But then once I actually start to do the research on this, I said, wait a minute, this is a man who, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not, started and began the catalyst in this nation around the abolitionist movement. It's proven, it's documented. How many of your residents had the opportunity to know that? And so I think when we talk about removing the statue or putting it back, I think the bigger conversation is do the people of Delaware have the knowledge to make the decisions, not for politicians to make that decision?
This seems a little bit like
I think to assume that they don't have the knowledge is almost kind of disrespectful to say that people only, don't get me wrong, because in schools we were only taught what they wanted to teach us, but through us being able to have way more access to way more knowledge now, people know that he was a slave owner. And I don't know of any stories where there was a nice and peaceful plantation. Like, I've never heard that narrative.
We honor presidents. They were slave owners.
So what?
But we still don't have to honor them. We still don't have to honor them now.
But we honor them because of their roles. The point I'm trying to make. Hold on. The point that I'm trying to make is, we know, and again, I go back to this word history. History, you have the good, the bad, and the ugly. We can't pick what is good and what is not. What we can do is we can tell it, we can inform the community, and allow the community to make that decision with facts and with information. And I can tell you, I think today, one of the things that we looked at is we said, going back to Caesar Rodney's role in the General Assembly, going back to the 1700s when this was taboo, again, a conversation around ending any form of slave trade because it was money, it was profit. But the question is, this man had the guts, for whatever reason, to go on record and say this was wrong. And for that at least deserves a public conversation.
So we're having a public conversation. I probably think as much as you're going to get out of one in doing this today, which is a good conversation nonetheless. But let's take a look at what you already do have, okay? Especially in Newcastle County. I think it could be in Sussex and Kent County as well, but you cannot go in to a neighborhood without the neighborhood sign that has Caesar Rodney right at the top of it. That's a heck of an accomplishment.
And by the way, just real quick, I was in the General Assembly when that happened. It was the Transportation Secretary under Ruth Ann Minner. I was against it at the time because I don't like spending extra money.
Funny.
And putting all those silly signs in front of neighborhoods, to me, was a waste of money.
Right.
Anyway, that's a different issue altogether.
So I'm glad you said that before we found out, because I definitely would have brought that back to you via email or text. But that's accomplished. I want to be clear. Charlie, we disagree, but I see you as a statesman and someone who understands from a legislative side and respects overall everyone. Why this organization would want to put this up and, I guess, minimize the feelings of so many Wilmingtonians and what that brings out, I can't get my mind wrapped around that. I see that as a Republican smack in the face. Just as already, like I've heard this expression over and over and over about punching down. Have you guys heard that? Why punch down? It seems as though the Republicans have like momentum right now. They're doing things in Washington. Charlie, you call him the orange man. Some people call him President Trump. I'm just saying there's things going on, and why we want to stoke the fires yet again over something that you have already.
So
let's just name it Biden Park.
I've been
put a statue of President Biden there.
I've been on the show a number of times.
Let's just Biden Park.
I've been on your show a number of times, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever once seen me be a over-the-top partisan saying we should do this because the Republican Party wants to do it? And I think the answer is going to be no.
There's normally numbers behind your disagreement on a certain topic. There's statistics or dollars.
I believe in God we trust. Everybody else bring data and information. Right. Which is why I think it is important to get out there the fact that Caesar Rodney owned maybe 20 slaves. I'm not suggesting that owning any slaves is a good thing, but it's a lot different than 200.
It's not.
No, it's not when you're the guy carrying the cotton.
Again. Everywhere across the globe, slavery was legal.
Not in America. It wasn't American slavery though, so you can't compare.
And you see, that's where you and I, you make that as a statement, but it's frankly not true. If you look at what the Ottoman Turks did to their slaves, cutting off heads, cutting off wrists, raping people, they had eunuchs in charge of harems of women. So I mean, to sort of equate that, but you just said that we were worse, and I'm just saying that no, they were just as bad. I mean, slavery is horrible.
So why?
So why are you? So why
go against public? So why go against public sentiment? Why go against public sentiment?
Because of what Brandon was saying. Because of what Brandon was saying is in 1770, slavery was everywhere, and a small group of people.
I'm talking about 2025 public sentiment.
Could you let me finish?
I apologize.
Please?
Go ahead.
And in 1770, a small group of people stood up with power and said, "This is wrong." And he was one of those people, and within 14 years of that, he was dead. And 2 years later, the guy that lived down the road from him also was one of those leaders, freed all of his slaves. And had Caesar Rodney lived, he might have done the same thing. I don't know what he would have done. But my point is, these guys led the charge that the rest of us, how many of us have ever stood in front of a crowd of 1,000 and pointed out those 1,000 and said, you are wrong?
2025 sentiment. Wilmingtonians don't want this. Why would you go against what they're saying?
Hold on. Let me actually respond to that. Current, the problem, again, you said 2025 sentiment. Before this show airs, how many folks, can we assume, because again, we want to be factual, how many folks actually knew the history of Caesar Rodney? Did the local elected officials say, let's have a town hall to have a discussion? Doesn't mean we take it down and put it back up, but the conversation today is what's important. And I think you have enough people who will say, again, history is not always right, doesn't always go your way, but it's important to know that in this state, in Dover, a man named Caesar Rodney, who was one of the founding fathers, who had a big impact on that, stood up and said, when no one else said it recordingly and documented before 1784, slavery is wrong and it must be stopped. And for that, even though it didn't pass in our assembly, but for that to me, and maybe moving forward, this conversation on statues, maybe the full history needs to be on each statue.
I can't agree with you more. I don't disagree, but I will say this. To your point, I think that statue stood there as long as it did because of the miseducation and the lack of education of the citizens of Wilmington. Because if they knew, they would have taken a truck and pulled that thing down in the middle of the night. Secondly, schools let out between 2:15 and 3:30, right? Wilmington, especially Rodney Square, is filled with kids. Some of them have to take public transportation to get back. That's due to our educational system. We'll talk about that during another week. But those 7-year-old kids that walk by there in second grade on their way to the bus stop in Rodney Square are the same 7-year-old kids that that guy on that horse, enslaved. The only reason that statue is there, I want to be clear, is, to your point, because people didn't know. After this show, and the people do listen, I guarantee you, and I would be willing, more than willing, to have a conversation in Dover at the Department of Transportation level to get those signs taken down out of neighborhoods, because I have educated myself with this. And regardless is if he had 200 or 20,
or maybe
he wasn't a winner.
Or maybe the pushback, Kerwin, is this is a man, which to me is almost a beacon of hope, to say people can do miraculous things, even if they're flawed.
Beacon of hope?
Let me say this to you. Have you been perfect all your life?
Far from, but I don't have a statue.
Stop there.
I don't have a statue.
Stop there.
Not yet. I'm working on it.
All right. Well, one day you'll get it. Maybe we'll put Kerwin up there. But the point we're trying to make is simply this. And again, we're not defending Caesar Rodney. At least I'm not. But what I am saying is this: the fact that this is a man who, many will know him as being one of the founding fathers of this state, of this nation. But the fact that he went on record and went against the 1,000 when it was not popular, when he could have been outcast because of his thoughts, but he pushed back and he said slavery is wrong and it must be stopped.
For once in his life, he said something honest.
The fact that he went on record saying that at least deserves a conversation. And again, with most statues, maybe if we're going to take down statues or keep statues up, we need to put not half the truth, but the entire truth of who that person really and truly was.
I still haven't gotten I'm sorry, Trippi, I haven't gotten an answer from either one of you about going against the sentiment of the citizens of Wilmington in 2025.
So I actually, I've answered that twice. I'll answer it a third time. And that is simply this, that if you'd asked me today, do you want to have this conversation in a month? And with all the things that have gone on with Washington and with Doge and all that kind of nonsense and bullcrap and like, I'd probably say, probably not. But we've had this conversation 4 and 6 weeks ago. And so you make the best decisions you can with the information that you have in front of you at the time. We actually had this conversation at the Caesar Rodney Institute last fall. So, Trump wasn't even president yet. So so this actually gets to my point around Caesar Rodney. It's very easy for us to be sitting here in mid to late March and say, why on earth would you want to have this conversation now?
Ever.
And my answer would be, well, yeah, probably if I'd known in December what I know today, I probably wouldn't have had this conversation now. Similar to Caesar Rodney, if he knew at the time of his life what we know today, he might have made different decisions.
Why don't you guys take the statue and put it in front of your building?
We don't have a building.
Caesar Rodney Institute.
We're a think tank that
Caesar
barely
Rodney
has any money
Institute
at all.
doesn't have
We have
the
trouble
building.
making payroll.
Well, put it in your yard.
I think.
How about we put it in your yard?
To Kerwin's point,
My neighbors would not like it.
I have a truck and a
neighbor puts a
trailer.
Kerwin
We'll
sign out, so
get
I'm
some
not sure he
guys
wants that sign
together,
right
some people together, and we'll put it in your yard, Brandon. I think that'll go over well.
I live in a condo. I don't
Well,
think so.
no.
That wouldn't
No,
fly.
Kerwin,
But
let's-
You might have to vote on it. It can be a democratic process.
Elevate the conversation.
I'm coming. I'm solutions. I'm coming up with solutions.
so again, I think to Kerwin's point that there was never a resistance against Caesar Rodney, or so many other statues that are in Wilmington. So many street signs, just names of streets that are in
High
Wilmington.
schools, school districts.
Right, because we were never educated on, like you said, the fullness of who that person really, of who they were. So for us to now say that now that we do know, but we still can't have an opinion, I was never anti-Caesar Rodney until I really found out the fullness of the man, because that's all I was taught.
And what is the fullness of the man?
You're not letting me finish.
Please,
Thank
I
you.
just want to know the fullness of the man.
Right. So now that we know, now that we're able to have access to more education, and we know more about them, like, why would I want to idolize someone who enslaved my family, my forefathers, people who I look like, people who I came from? Why would I want him on a statue? And it was hidden from us intentionally. Schools knew the fullness of his slavery, a fullness of who he was, but they never taught us because they knew they were afraid of these kind of conversations. So why weren't we taught that? It was intentional. So now that we know, and now it's like, well, you can't minimize that part, but why are we trying to? Why can't we minimize
I think
this
some
part?
of that is that you hold the opinion
Right.
that American slavery was worse than anywhere else. And my argument is slavery sucks everywhere. And there was no good slavery and bad slavery. It was all bad slavery. And they split families up, and they killed people, and they raped people, and they butchered people across the globe.
Right.
And so irrespective of whether they looked like me, you, or they were Indian or Asian, people owning people is bad.
If we can agree on that, why can't we agree that Caesar Rodney was a slave owner?
So my point
who
is,
most likely did the same thing?
in history, almost anybody that you look to and say, oh, this is somebody that was important in history, would have been a slave owner.
So we don't idolize them. We don't make statues of them because
But we
people's
do.
feelings matter.
Across the globe and across this
But
country.
we shouldn't.
No, that's okay. That's an opinion.
So, Kurt, I hear a couple things here. I hear one, we shouldn't have certain statues because people are human, people are flawed. But the other piece to this, and I know we don't want to get too political tonight, but this comes back really to education. And I think one of the challenges is what we're at least advocating
Delaware's
for.
education.
Delaware's
This
education.
comes back to Delaware's education.
Yes, it does.
And whether or not our children are being educated on specific things.
Yes, it does, because the people of Wilmington, the people of this state, have a right to know the history. Now, whether they agree or not, that's on them. That's not on us. But they have a right to at least know who the man was, and they can decide. They should have decided whether that statue went down, not city council.
That's why he's up there. That's why he was up there, because we were
He's
educated.
not up there now.
No, hold on. He was up there because we were educated on who he was. That's why it was pretty much unanimously agreed upon to have a statue of Caesar Rodney. But when we found out more, we said, hold up now. Like, who wants to idolize, who wants to put a statue of somebody who has that kind of background, who we just admitted that slavery was terrible across the globe?
Council President,
Yes.
did the council decide that, or did the people of Wilmington
The mayor.
decide that?
The mayor
So
decided
the people
to
of Wilmington didn't have a say.
The mayor decided to take it down because he knew that it was going to be destroyed. It was like Kerwin said, if somebody was going to get up there and pull it down. So he decided to take it down. That's why it was taken down. Our council didn't decide.
And by the
mayor
way,
did.
I fully, the mayor is the representative of the people, the executive branch, and I fully respect his right to take the statue down, to leave it in storage, to do whatever he wants. I mean, and he is duly elected by the citizenry of the state or the city of Wilmington. So that's,
And it's still in Rodney Square, right? So Rodney Square is still there.
Well, we have the Gulf of America, which means there are like 3 or 4 songs and the lyrics have to change now because they don't rhyme with America. So
That's next, though. That's next. The name change is next.
The name change is next. I have no knowledge of a name change activity. What are your all's thoughts?
Here's the thing. Before because I know there's conversation about should it become Biden Square.
I was joking about that.
Well,
No.
But there have been conversations. You know, my thing is,
I was truly joking. I didn't know that.
but you know, I think there are many other Wilmingtonians that we can honor and recognize. If we're going to play that game, I mean, hell, why not?
I would claim partisan on that.
Why not call it Bob Marley Park? He spent time here.
I think we should call it the People's Park.
The People's Park.
People's Park.
Okay.
People's.
Okay.
that is one of the wimpiest things I've ever heard in my life.
Or name it.
And the reason I say that is why don't we just name it a number, right?
It's
What's
inclusive.
the census block number, right? I mean, what should.
No, it's
Shouldn't
inclusive.
our
It's not
locations have?
wimpy. It's inclusive of who we are in Wilmington.
I don't know. I think and maybe it's just the cynic and skeptic in me, which, trust me, is very, very deep. And that is, when individuals on both sides of the aisle, and they'll say, well, we the people demand X. It's like, well, that's your opinion and the buddies you hang out with. I just think that if we're so afraid of controversy nowadays that we're going to call things people and we're going to call them only after flowers or animals or things like that.
Not afraid, but I think respectful.
You say tomato, I say tomato,
I think
right?
respectful,
I mean,
because it would just. I don't know if we understand that the type of.
Part of the problem.
Again, the very minimum is the emotional trauma.
And I understand that part. I understand that part. But I also.
Which would be followed up by physical damage.
There are, and I think you're probably right. That the mayor did that in all good, appropriate. And
it wouldn't go well because it is art, right? Somebody put time into it. There's no reason for it to be destroyed.
that to Brandon's point about history is, and first of all, the city has all sorts of places that we could name, all sorts of things, and after all sorts of people, and you could make them all different history and different things, and really have something powerful. I often thought we should have an Underground Railroad trail that comes through here and has some of those things, right? So return the statue. But I do think if you're going to start naming places after people, you should at least. I mean, Caesar Rodney was dead 139 years before they named the square after him. He was there for about 100 years before the statue came down, and so that's 239 years. So let's wait 239 years before we name something after somebody else to make sure we got everything out on the table as to what that person might have done in their lives. So if you wanted to name it Biden, just if you wait until 2450, you can do that.
I think honest, if we're going to be fair, I think that naming the square after President Biden would be just as controversial.
I agree.
I agree.
And he's got a train station. He's got a school down at the University of Delaware. He's going to have a library.
And I wouldn't want to be the statue because I got a feeling he's going to be dressed up every morning in something spectacular, and he's going to be a lot of different.
Well,
colors.
we might have the same debate we had over the Elvis stamp. Do you have the young Biden or do you have the old Biden? Do you have the young Elvis or the old Elvis?
But he's going to look different every morning. I guarantee you, Joe's going to look a little different. And I don't.
That's
think
another reason to wait 50 or 70 years before, because then no one will remember what he looked like.
Yeah,
and
let things
anymore.
die down a little bit. But gentlemen, I really want to not only thank you for having this conversation. It's tough, right? I think that our viewers are smarter because of it. I think that we brought up a lot of things that people didn't know, especially a lot of things that I didn't know, researching this over the past few months. And you got to hear some of the vitriol that President Congo has been getting from folks, and hearing that directly in a calm state and having those tough conversations. Those are conversations that I think need to happen more in this country. We need to really have these difficult talks and get feedback from one another. And you all need to be commended for having this. You have a difficult ride, Mr. Copeland, in order to quote.
I believe
to be
in
Mr.
history, and
Caesar
I believe
Rodney.
in talking about the good, bad, and the ugly in an open, civil forum. And I believe that we ought to be respectful.
Absolutely.
And try to understand one. You talked about in your opening. You said it was a reckoning, and that word bothered me because what it should be is an understanding. How do we, of different backgrounds, different beliefs, different knowledges, come together and try to understand one another? Because part of the problem this country's doing right now is...
There wasn't time for that.
But in 2025, the country's on fire.
Not like it was then.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm not so sure that it's different. I mean, if you're a Tesla dealership, it's certainly on fire.
But I haven't heard one burn down.
Oh, yeah.
Yet.
Oh, no, they've had... But anyway,
Tesla, okay.
But anyway, the point is that the divisions, even this, we're getting a division, right? Fortunately, I love you enough, man, that it's okay, right?
Kerwin, I think tonight what we did is we at least gave the viewers something to go home, do their homework, and for them to make a decision as to whether that decision, whether it went down or was left back up, was a good decision. And what I, at least tonight, thank you for is giving your viewers and us the opportunity to talk about those tough topics. This is how we solve problems, by doing this, which is what we did tonight.
Well, I hope you guys come back, Councilman Congo, Mr. Copeland, Mr. Brice. I want you to come back, visit us again, because I think that we have a very good conversation here about some other topics that won't be about statues. I have a feeling, I'm not assuming, statistically, and you can appreciate this, at the rate in which your executive orders have been flying out of those offices, I would suspect that there will be more for us to talk about here for this country and what that stands for Delawareans. And even as a Delawarean, there's a lot coming out right now. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time and out of our all busy schedules to be here today to have this conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you all for watching. We just spent the better part of an hour debating a statue. And if you think that's trivial, then you haven't been paying attention, because this was never just about Caesar Rodney. It's about how we define history and who gets to tell it. It's about whose stories get cast in bronze and whose are buried beneath it. And whether the public's honor is a lifetime achievement award or a reflection of the values we claim to stand for right now. And yes, this is always about race. And it has been. The discomfort around saying that out loud is exactly why we need to say it again, and say it often. Conversations about race and politics are avoided like landmines. We pretend that neutrality is nobility, when in reality, it's silence in the face of truth. But avoiding the hard conversations doesn't protect us. It paralyzes us. You can't move forward as a city, as a state, as a country, if you're too afraid to talk about what's holding you back. We are long past the point of needing polite debates and soft landings and all that other stuff. We need honesty, we need courage, and we need to be willing to have the conversations that make us shift in our seats from discomfort. We can't change the past, but we can choose what we elevate in the present. And maybe, just maybe, a city that's trying to move forward doesn't need to keep looking backwards for validation. Tonight, we had one of those hard conversations, and whether you agree or not, I hoped you walked away thinking a little harder than when you came in. This is the agenda. We're not here to make you comfortable. We're here to make you think. Good night. God bless. See you next week.